Hey, folks, welcome back to More Than a Refresh T3D Sessions. We're here with another round on wellness, especially for tech people, with Amanda Nystrom, Command Prompt CEO and National Health Board Certified Health and Wellbeing Coach. Amanda, you said you wanted to talk about tools. What are we talking about? Expand on that.
Thanks, JD. Well, in the first time that you had me on, you asked me about tools, about really looking at our habits and how do we, I guess, optimize them, for lack of a better term. And tools are hard to come by when it comes to wellness because everything works differently for everybody. That's why diet pills work for some people and don't work for others. That's why there's about a dozen different exercise chains, right? So, actually, I think there's a lot more than that.
A lot more
I
than
way
that.
underestimated that. Because everything works for people differently. And that's one of the things, the major flaws of our medical system is that we apply general ideas to individuals without looking at their life holistically.
And what you're talking about is functional medicine.
I'm talking about a lot of things, but that's a part of it, certainly, is customizing the actual treatment for the person.
Okay, but to give, granted, I'm not a big fan of the health industry either, but when you talk about tools, it doesn't matter what tool you have, whether it be Ozempic or calisthenics or proper diet or whatever, it all starts with discipline, right?
I think it starts with awareness, like we talked about last time, but I want to expound on that. Discipline
Okay.
is definitely a part of it, but discipline isn't applicable if you don't know what you're starting with. Like you mentioned needing to lose weight, right? But where does that come from? It's not just that you
Comes from our fat.
right, but where does that come from, right? You have
That
to
comes from beer
what's the why behind the why? But why do you drink beer?
because I like it.
No, but there's more than that. There's more than
Okay.
that.
All right. Here's a real simple transparency moment. I drink beer because the world is shit. We have a taco as our president, and it basically kind of numbs the pain of stupidity that is our society.
So while I would love to go on a tangent about that, I do want to bring up the four essential pieces,
I
I
was
think.
just answering the question.
Yeah. So awareness has the self evaluation piece, but there's also the other part where we are not told the full truth when it comes to what health and wellness is. If you were to go to a doctor and say, I need to lose weight, they're going to say, okay, so work on your nutrition and improve your sleep and exercise. They don't tell you that wellness, even if you do all those things, will not be complete. Like you may not feel fulfilled. You may still feel like there's a hole. And that's because we're missing things like connection and mindful awareness and financial stability, right? There's a whole breadth of things that are required for us to pay attention to in order for us to make progress with our health. And that's directly applicable from things like health checks, right? Everything is connected there. If you make a change on your system and you don't consider how it's going to affect your database, you're going to pay for that.
Okay, so hold on. Let's back up for a second because you said something there that I think is important. One, you mentioned doctors and nutrition. Doctors don't know anything about nutrition. They're very often not taught that at all, which is why there's a specialty called nutritionist. Okay, so that's important for I think our listeners to understand that if a doctor goes and says, "Well, we need to work on your nutrition," I would directly ask them, "Well, what is your background in nutrition?" That's number one. But beyond that, what you're really talking about is wellness. You mentioned holistic in the very beginning. We talk about wellness, we're not, there's a reason why it says health and well being. So when we're talking about well being, it's the entire person. We're talking about your emotional state, your physical state, your neurological state, and everything, and how even your environmental right, condition,
Mhm.
right? Whether you're being surrounded by negative input all the time. And I'm not just talking about bad girlfriends. I'm talking about lights. I'm talking about, car horns, whatever the case may be, right? That's what you mean when you say holistically or well-being, right?
Yes, and thank you for elaborating on that because I knew I was missing a really important piece. And I do want to elaborate on the environment part. Um, I recently relocated to Montana from Washington State, and it was mostly for me, it was because in Washington, everything is a hustle culture. You don't even think about it. It just becomes who you are and how you operate to the point where it affects your work and your personal life. And it's just how things are. Montana is a polar opposite. It is like pulling teeth in order to get a specialist doctor's appointment because everybody is more chill. But that bleeds into the culture. You actually have conversations with people here. Your nervous system isn't on fire 24/7. It is so much more balanced to what we were created to be, right? To be with nature than to be in this constant, like, you have to answer emails 24/7. You have to get these answers to your
Uh,
boss
okay,
24/7.
hold on, back up, hippie. Let's let,
Conservative hippie.
conservative hippie. Just back up for a second. Let's give someone a practical example, okay? Because you did, for anybody that don't know, I mean, we're actually in the same cabin here. We both live in Montana. But that being said, you recently experienced this directly after being in Montana all but full time for the last 6 months. What happened that allowed you to experience this so intensely? Seattle.
I was I returned back to Washington as a tourist for the first time, and the input and the noise pollution and the nonstop go go go. I mean, it initially I was very calm because Montana for me has a very calming effect, but by day 2 I was starting to adapt to that, and my anxiety was higher, and my responses weren't really responses as much as reactionary. Uh, like everything became a trigger, right? And I don't want to behave like that. I don't want that to be my modus operandi. I've spent a lot of years fighting that, and it's one of the reasons that last year my physical therapist said, "Your nervous system is shot." I don't want that, and that comes back to the awareness of wellness being more than just nutrition and sleep. It's so much more than that.
Well, we recently had a discussion with a team member about that, about cities being comfy was his quote. And they're not, they're convenient. And I think that a lot of people, well, without getting into the societal structure of it, I think a lot of people just don't get enough nature. I mean, what we're experiencing in Montana isn't unique to Montana. It's unique to a rural environment, right? I mean, it could have been, we could have lived in Riverside, Washington, which is, I mean, just like where we are now, frankly. Um, but as we wrap up here, I mean, you mentioned tools, right? So let's talk about a couple of the tools that people can use to regulate or have discipline or awareness for their well-being.
Well, the first one is bringing awareness to yourself. That in itself is a tool. And we can talk about that later, not on this because we don't have time. But the second one is assessment of where you're at versus where you want to be. Because we usually don't think about that. We get into the minutia of this is what my checklist is. We don't think big picture. And we are all our best advocates and our biggest enemy. And so when you sit down and you're like, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm struggling with, and this is where I want to be, you start to open the door for other opportunities. And it starts to question and invoke the correct questions, not just the what did I do wrong, but the how do I learn from this opportunity and do better? And then after assessment, if I have time.
Let me interject real quick on that. I think it's very important for me anyway, something I have learned from you is that it's not what did I do wrong. It's how can I do better?
Mm.
Because you may have done the best you could at that moment. It may not even have been wrong. It just opens opportunities to do better for the next time. Because the moment you say you're wrong, it's negative and you're being negative towards yourself. And a
Mhm.
lot of us in this world, especially those of us as we've gotten older, you can't hold on to those wrongs, but you can hold on to those opportunities if you want to move forward.
Yeah.
Okay, what's your next tool?
Making it accessible. So breaking it down. We talked about last time you can't do an OS system upgrade and a Postgres system upgrade while without the planning. And you can't do it just because your boss feels like you need to spend the weekend doing that, right? You have to do the planning. You have to do the due diligence of narrowing down what those small details are. And you have to figure out what your first draft version is, your MVP. If you don't have that, then you're going to end up in a what were we supposed to be doing situation. And that is where a downward spiral of judgment, self-judgment, is going to be implemented. And then finally, make it actionable. And one of the things that I have been taught is to use things like SMART goals. So how are you going to actually do this? When are you going to do this? And then the brain side of it, I should say neurological, um, is to know that, like you mentioned earlier, the small steps, those bug fixes are essential. And if you don't celebrate the bug fixes and you don't really embrace those as key, you're going to end up missing pieces and you're not going to make the forward progress that you need to. And because I feel rushed, that's how I'm going to wrap that up.
All right. Well, I'm going to close out this episode of More Than a Refresh, the T3D Sessions with Amanda Nystrom, Command Prompt CEO and National Health Board Certified Health and Wellbeing Coach, with this little philosophical idea. Your alpha release is when you are conceived, and the final release, the production release of the human, is always the same. You're dead. We all end up at the same point, so we might as well improve until that point.